Look, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this session, Special Collections from the Ground Up. So we're exploring some of the regional heritage collections from the University of Newcastle Library. My name is Anne Hardy and I'm the coordinator of the GLAMEX Lab and Hunter Living Histories coordinator at the University Library at the University of Newcastle. And joining you today with some of my colleagues on Special Collections, who I'll introduce to you shortly. And look, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I and some of my other colleagues are meeting on today. I'm on Awabakal country and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I want to welcome everyone here today, and if you'd like to share, please share in the chat the country that you're joining us from today as well, if you'd like to do so. Today we're going to hear from 5 of my colleagues. Each of them will speak for about 5 minutes, just a short discussion about some of the items that are held in special collections and that are of interest to them. Then we're going to have 5 minutes just Q&A, so you're very welcome to put a question in the chat and I will just monitor any questions coming through, or if you'd like to ask a question, we made it a Zoom meeting, so it can be very much in conversation as well. Be mindful, I guess, that we are on quite a tight schedule, and for that reason I'll share a link shortly, but that's got contact of all our panelists and the topic. So if we don't get to your questions and you want to contact each panelist, feel welcome to do so as well. They're very happy to be contacted after this session. So to begin with, and I'll share those links shortly. And I'll also share some online resources that we hold at the University of Newcastle Library Special Collections, such as our Living Histories digital repository. That's where a lot of our online material is held. And also, if there's any other collections that relate or areas of history that you're interested in that relate to any of the resources that we share today, we're also happy for you to share those in the chat. I'll be saving the chat, so again, if anyone wants to contact me, I can send links out at any time. So you've got everything captured here. So look, we might begin. I'll introduce our first panelist, who is Paige Wright. Paige is a special collections librarian and has worked at the university for 8 years. She coordinates the Living Histories repository and is an advocate for equity, diversity within collections. Her topics of interest include rare books, promoting special collections, community engagement, digital humanities, Wikipedia and digital collections, and she's currently volunteers on the committees for ALIA Rare Books and Wikimedia Australia. So welcome, Paige. If you'd like to share your screen, and Paige is going to talk about how to become rich, which is a very interesting topic that was written by Bertha, McNamara, mother of the Australian labour movement. So welcome, Paige.
Great. How's that looking for you all?
That's looking good.
Good. Well, today I'm going to be sharing with you a pamphlet from my rare books collection that is digitized and available on Living Histories. It's called How to Become Rich Beyond the Dreams of Avarice in the Shortest Possible Time, or Labor and Socialism. It's been printed in Sydney by the Workers' Trade Union in 1908. I chose this piece because the title jumped out at me. Today, something like Get Rich Quick. If you see that online, it's referred to as clickbait. It's there to get your attention, and I was really impressed by how the author of this piece knew her audience well. She was targeting the working class people of the early 1900s, many of whom immigrated to Australia with dreams of becoming rich. And yes, I said she. This political pamphlet was published by a woman, the unsung hero of the Australian labour movement, Bertha McNamara. It fits well with the theme From the Ground Up, as Bertha and her husband were instrumental in growing the Australian Socialist League in New South Wales as a grassroots movement. Their bookshop on Castlereagh Street, Sydney, was a place where radical political ideas were explored. Now, this purchase was made possible through the Read a Light Fund. Read a Light is the university's biggest benefactor. She left $1.5 million to purchase rare books and special collections items. Bertha was a Polish immigrant. In 1888, as a widow and a mother of 6, Bertha McNamara struggled to survive as a saleswoman in Melbourne. It was at this time she became involved in radical politics, feminism, and socialism. In 1891, she published her first pamphlet, Home Talk on Socialism, under the pseudonym A Woman. She married William McNamara in 1892 and moved to Sydney to help him run his socialist bookstore and start the Australian Socialist League. Her husband was also an active political writer and went to jail for libel for writing about the banks, and he died an early death of consumption in 1906. One news article at the time reports that he was denied admission to hospitals that were supposed to meet cases such as his. Bertha continued to run the bookstore after his death, and How to Become Rich was published in honor of him. Bertha McNamara is an example of a woman who was influential in early Australian politics. She has been memorialized by a brass plaque in the foyer of the Sydney Trades Hall, but her story is still lost in the greater history of Australian politics. She was also influential as the mother-in-law of both Jack Lang, Labor Premier of New South Wales, and writer Henry Lawson. This newspaper article from the 1950s mentions Bertha and her husband's influences on the Labor Party. She was also influential in the Newcastle region. She worked alongside Rose Scott for women's suffrage and the Factories Act. In this How to Become Rich pamphlet, she highlights Newcastle's unpaid army of apprentice milliners, 245 of whom were working without pay. In the conclusion of this pamphlet, she notes the spread of socialism in Australia to Newcastle and Wallsend around the mining industry, which is connected to the union and 8-hour workday movements in Australia. The real importance of women helping to frame the laws will be manifest before long. Women have great power of endurance, and for ages they have, with more or less patience, suffered the cruel injustice of laws which they had no power of making. Bertha wrote these words in 1908. That same year, she unsuccessfully ran for the Senate. It was over a decade later before Edith Cowan became the first female parliamentarian, and it wasn't until the 1940s that a woman entered federal politics. If you were interested in learning more about Bertha and her story, I would encourage you to read the How to Become Rich pamphlet, which is digitized and available on Living Histories, and read her husband's entries in her husband's entries in the Australian Biographical Dictionary. If you're interested in hearing more about the Australian socialist movement in the Hunter Valley, look at the blog post for the Josiah Cocking archive. He would have been familiar with both William and Bertha McNamara's writings in their bookstore. He was one of many in Newcastle and the Hunter that were inspired by their ideas and their leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? I know when Paige suggested this publication, and then it wasn't long before we started thinking of other collections that sort of directly related to it. So please feel free to ask any questions. No takers? Thanks, Paige. May I introduce our next speaker, who is Swan. So Curr is a proud Gomeroi and Wiradjuri man. He was born on Anaiwan land near Armidale, and Curr lives and works on Wabakal country. He's been fortunate to experience language from an extensive number of Aboriginal language groups from across Australia and has been able to identify words from his travels. Curr began his journey at the University of Newcastle working within the Wallatuka Institute as a project officer with a focus on Indigenous languages, which has since given him the depth of understanding and appreciation of language history. Curr's work has allowed him to research in language with the help of collections, which has led him to work with us in the University Library. So welcome, Curr, if you'd like to share your topic.
Okay, all right, so Yama, Ginagay, Yawoi, Yalu, Nyindagara, and which way? Just a few different ways I know how to say hello to you all in different language from across New South Wales. Some pretty important things I've picked up along the way, just in greeting people in these spaces. Today I'm going to share with you the Curr volumes from 1878, I believe, and what the Curr volumes essentially are is a documentation of, oops, sorry, wrong screen, of languages from around Australia. The first thing I noticed when can you all see that screen? I'm not sure if you can.
Yeah, what we can see is the Victorian Collections.
Okay, so first up, I just need to let you know that this is something that we have in our collections and don't necessarily have digitized at the moment. So I had to go to different websites and sources to find some images and some things to show you guys today. As Anne said, I've been brought to the library and special collections through my love and the need to explore languages and rebuild the Indigenous culture through language. And one of the first things I actually noticed was these the Curr volumes. The first thing that really jumped out and grabbed my eye was a map of languages that were documented in certain parts of the country. So if you all can see the map I'm looking at, we can see the...
Curr, we could see it a couple of seconds ago.
I took it away?
Yeah, that's it. That's
all right.
it.
So what it essentially is it's showing where language had been documented before 1887 and all the different works that people had done in these areas throughout the country. I see the need to draw back on original sources to find how Indigenous people are going to move away from the academic style of writing and linguistic style of writing dictionaries relating to Aboriginal languages. And I don't know if anybody's picked one of them up, but when I get into looking at dictionaries, it becomes more of a headache to find out the sort of things I'm trying to find. But one of the good things I've noticed about the fourth volume in the Curr diaries is that he really went away from that academic style of writing a dictionary and collated all of these peoples and language groups into one pretty big volume that shows the way language when it's put up against each other. So just going back on how I said hello, there would be all of these place names and all the different ways to say hello in different language groups. And goes on for different words for certain things like mothers, grandmothers, fathers, uncles, brothers, kangaroos, all the sorts of words that you might think you'd find useful in rebuilding a language. But the interesting thing to me was that especially here in the Newcastle area, they had work that went into Curr's volumes from the Reverend Threlkell's work and his understanding of knowledge with Biraban, understanding of language with Biraban, sorry. But the thing I really seen him transfer from volumes 1, 2, and 3 was the fact that it was in that sense where if an everyday person would pick up these volumes, they wouldn't be able to understand or gather the information that they need to restore their languages. So in the 4th volume, he did something different, and he put the language in a form where people could see where the place names are in the first column here. And the word is mother, but there's 5 or 6 different pages and hundreds of different places that use different words for mother. But the interesting thing for me is if we have an original source like this, and we can go back to where Curr got his information from, to the original sources like Threlkell's work, we can start to create our own interpretation and development of language outside of an academic setting, and really have that sort of community approach and sharing of knowledge through language with our communities, instead of having something developed and a dictionary thrown into communities and say, hey, this is your language, now you learn it. It just doesn't work like that. So I think for me, this is probably one of the most interesting things that I've come across in our collections. I'm not sure how I'm going for time, but that's just me, and that's the first thing I noticed when I came to the Special Collections team. Thanks.
Thank you, Curr. Curr, thanks for sharing that. Like, you're fairly new to our team, and I think your perspective and having identified that resource is really valuable. Has anyone got any questions they would like to ask Curr, or just be part of the conversation around language, work around Indigenous languages at all?
I've got one. What's your favorite word or phrase you've found so far? Was there anything surprising in there?
Within this one book, I have a little bit of a weird sense of humor, and Aboriginal people in general have this sort of sense of humor that not very many people really understand or get. But the first thing I did when I found this book, I started flipping through the pages, and I came across the word that I've used all my life, and my kids use, and my grandparents and mother and everybody still uses, and the word is guna. But in the way it's explained in the book, it's excrement, so it's shit, really. And the thing that I found so interesting going through all the different places and different areas where this word is represented, there isn't too much difference in the way they've spelt it in different parts of the country or pronounced it in different parts of the country. So I say it with a G, other places say it with a K, and I've seen it with a Q. So when we hear that word and then start to try to say it in these other different ways. So it becomes guna, kuna, guna, kuna, and guna, and different ways that it was written, but it all comes back to meaning the same thing, which made me Google, and I was like, it's all shit. So it's just something that I like to do. I like to find something funny to make myself interested in particular things. So yeah, thanks for that question, Zane.
And also Curr, Lauren Collier, one of our participants today, she also makes a comment. We use that word too.
Yeah. So it's one of the words that really survived any sort of colonization and disruption in our languages. So it's good to see it's not just here in New South Wales; it's all over the country, in the written form, anyway.
And so this particular resource, the plans are to particularly digitise the map at like high resolution in the language, and so. Yeah, so look, we might move on to our next panelist. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Amir Mogadin, is our conservator at the University of Newcastle Special Collections. And Amir has 22 years of experience working as a conservator, researcher and lecturer in Australia and overseas. Since commencing his work at the university, Amir's worked on several preservation collections, including 15 photographic collections, and recently he's completing his work on development, promotion and curation of the university's Fraternal Society collection. Amir's published peer review academic books and articles on the concepts of historiography and political mythology, and has delivered talks on several domestic and international conferences. He's an advocate for equity and diversity, decolonisation of collections, and his topics of interest of history and violence, genocide, culture, politics, museum-based education, and digital humanities. So welcome, Amir.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for listening to this talk. I just would like to make sure that if you can see the page that I have shared.
Yes, we can see it, Amir.
Okay, that's great. So I understand that the time for this presentation is very short, so I'll just briefly mention about the project that I worked, and if you wanted to have more information, this link is available on Hunter Living Histories, and you can check that out and give me feedback if you would like. Yes, I have worked on a number of photographic collections, and the one that I would like to share with you guys this morning is the Rodoni Collection. The Rodoni Collection belongs to amateur photographer and Navy private Thomas James Rodoni, who lived in late 19th century until mid 20th century. Most of his work have been happening around the times of early 20th century, before, like after Federation, and then the wartime, and a little bit after that. But yeah, as it is customary and typical about the collections that we receive, like basically when we got the collection, it wasn't in the best condition. So we had to do many things, like basically as a conservator, you need to give them first an identity that is called accessioning in a sense. And then the task includes cleaning, documenting, unblocking, like if you can, restoring some, and then rehousing so that they are ready for digitization. And this is very involving task. And for justifying the thing that we are doing, basically, we need to have something about the collection that we can present it. It's just like, it's because we are using all the resources, we need to make sure that the collection that we are working on is something of the benefit of the region and the nation and the country, everyone. So this is, in a sense, can be called as a concept of significance. So in building up our collections, basically in every collection that I worked, like from the ground up, with the greater team that we work in cultural collection with, for me, the concept of significance was the key factor. And I think this is something that I would like to share with you guys, because if you are practicing it in anywhere else, you might be of benefit of like using Rodoni as an example. So like significance is a concept that through which we need to explain that why is it important and so what that we are conserving this collection. And to justify my position in supporting this collection, I generally am using the photographic theory. And to me, this collection particularly, and like I would like to draw your attention to this frame that I'm showing here, is delivering something that I can call it photographic effect. And this is something that in short explains that when a group of people are taking photo in an event or in an occasion, it creates a bound around the people who are in the photo, which generally creates a kind of identity and relatedness together. And I think to me, particularly because of the importance of the photography in the early 20th century, like we need to consider that how difficult and heavy and expensive it was in the time. So this is very much pronounced here. And in this photo, it is very much clear. You can see people are marching in a kind of uniform, kind of clothing. It is right after the Federation, so a new nation is developing. And also it is in the time of war. So the people are participating and taking part in a significant moment around the world. And Rodoni is, I don't know, consciously or unconsciously documenting that. So it gives, through Rodoni, we can look at the aura of the time, like the relationship between the time and the space and people, that we can look into it from the photo. And this is not the only example. Like this is another example, a flag, people, like uniform, again, a concept of a nation and unified people. And this is very much common in the photos of this time and around the world. Like I'm working on another project, I can see that this is very much shared in the Middle East as well. And you see again, the same kind of framing of people of the same faith. So just to cut short and make it brief, I think to me, this collection was significant because it was narrating a time and very significant time of the birth of a nation as Australia. And I think this collection is now used by researchers and greater university community. In future, it might be used by many other people, which we don't know them yet. And I think one message that I can communicate through this is that, to me, the significance of each collection is the concept that to a large extent decides the future of that collection and the work that we do. So it's very important how we argue the position of our position in that. And yeah, so with this, I would finish my talk. And please go to this link if you like, if you were interested. And yeah, leave me with feedback and comments. I would really and greatly appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Amir. Yeah, it's quite a complex collection, isn't it? And I think because it was also a collection that was sort of rediscovered a couple of decades ago and donated by the son of Rodoni, who was sort of basically an amateur photographer, but as Amir's pointed out, he's just captured a period of time that is quite an unusual sort of set of images.
Yeah.
Anyone got any questions for Amir?
Just, I would like to give a note that there are more links that have been provided by John and Anne and the rest of the team in the times like before. So if you would like to get more story, like go and check these links as well.
Thanks, Amir. Yeah, I've shared some of those in the chat already. If people are interested, and the other aspect to this collection was through the team's work to conserve and then make them available online, was that we were able to build more knowledge about the collection and find that there was a portion of the collection that the photographs had been taken by a German anthropologist.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I didn't get to that because of the time, but yeah.
Quite complex, isn't it? But
yeah,
the story's there in the links, and
yeah.
So thank you very much.
No problem.
That's great. And so if there's no urgent questions from anybody, I will move on and introduce my next, the next panelist, who's Zane Metcalf. Zane is an archivist with the University Special Collections and has been in the role for 3 years. His last speaking engagement was for the International Council of Archives in 2019 conference on reading room design and function. His recent focus has been on community engagement and accessibility and visibility of archival collections to the general public. So welcome, Zane, and sorry that I've switched order there.
It's all good. It's all good. I hope things didn't get too mixed up, but you know, we'll push on. Can everybody see the PowerPoint that I've got up at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So welcome everybody. I'm here today to present you with something really, really interesting, in my opinion, assembled from a really dry collection of material, which honestly is the best kind of material. So essentially what I want to present to you today is a collection of newspaper articles that were collected over a span of 10 years by a local genealogist named Margaret Cudden. And what it is that these articles solely focus on just the village of Waratah in the 1860s. It's the entirety of the 1860s. They're all from, now it's in Mayfield, but it was back then called Waratah before the borders moved. So essentially the idea is that these articles are entirely from a short-lived newspaper called the Newcastle Chronicle, and every article about the little hamlet of Waratah was dutifully copied down into the document. And I have no clue why Margaret Cudden had done this, actually. As a genealogist, you generally go after your own family with a burning passion, you know, and often will skip over things. And that's generally been my experience with my own family doing their genealogies. But she went the extra mile and essentially decided to create the entire document for the entire village. So whenever there's a reference to or an article about the village of Waratah, she put it into this document. So she assembled it sometime in the 1980s. It was typed entirely on a typewriter, and all the source material was doubtlessly copied down from a local microfiche database. And look, honestly, that's notable on its own, because could you imagine going through 10 years of newspapers looking for every article about a particular little town and then typing them out on a typewriter next to you, or going home and typing them out on a typewriter next to you? It would represent months or years of work. And today, all we would do is we would just go to Trove, we would search our topic, and we would copy and paste the entire article in and fix it up for any mistakes. So hats off to her for doing this literally 40 years ago. And honestly, it's really, really ahead of its time in a way that I'll elaborate on. So I selected this entirely because I think that it really emphasizes the theme from the ground up, because it gives you a really fascinating and novel approach to contextualizing these databases. I feel the item fits really well because it allows us to reconstruct a really hyper-local, very personal, and really, really textured historical narrative of not just Waratah, but any place you care to pick. So essentially, the idea is that what we get with this is we get an entirely new way to engage with newspaper databases. The document only tracks a really specific place over a really short period of time, and reading through it is sort of like reading a play or a screenplay, and it becomes this slice of life story. It's like a realist Studio Ghibli film where everybody has tuberculosis. It's a really sharp focus on a really small area, and that manages it to be really, really readable. It's filled with humor, it's relatable problems, there's recurring characters. It's really limited in scope, and because it's only 10 years, and because it's so limited, you get 255 pages, and you can smash that out in an afternoon, and you can read it front to back in an afternoon. And you get these narrative arcs. Like, for example, right here, we have the reporter who decided to, report on the goings on in Waratah and writes this bizarre screed about the men and women of Waratah, about how, there's big Dicks and big Dans and big Harrys, and particular focus on Mrs. Barton. And it's absolutely bizarre. And reading through this, I read this particular passage and I went, that's really, really odd. And then as I scrolled down through it, and about half a dozen pages later, I come to the letters to the editor of the Newcastle Chronicle. And this writer, who chose to remain anonymous, wrote essentially what is an 1860s Twitter call-out post calling the author of that particular article, among other things, a bludger and a pervert, for lack of a better word. And this is just a very small excerpt of this person's rant against the journalist, who apparently barely ever showed up, apparently didn't really do any of his research. And the person writing this article claimed that he could go to the pub and find better news than what this guy was reporting, calls him Mr. Occasional and all the rest of it, and asks him, what on earth are you writing? This is trash. It's terrible. And that to me is really fascinating, because the thing is that by limiting the scope, you're making it ironically much more generalist. So historians, for the most part, will read for the benefit of their audience, will pick something really, really narrow and really, really specific, because essentially the idea is that, you want to keep on topic for what you're doing with, and, you want to know what you're talking about. Historians will generally...
Intriguing question of the morning. Jenny, any thoughts on how you can find that?
Can somebody's got the, can everybody please mute themselves? Thank you. So essentially the idea is that historians are really focused on a really narrow field of view. And the idea is that they'll only search for really narrow texts on their topic. And, that's what they've got to do. But the idea is that they're skipping over really interesting details by doing this. So they don't generally read generalist texts unless they're branching into a new area. So instead of generally getting filtered into really, really narrow and specialist texts, this assemblage gives you a lot of context and clues and avenues of research from the ground up. And this method of study often means that resources like Trove are cherry-picked. You get keywords and parameters for an item that's like really thin slices of the historical record to be held up to the light and have a look at. But a historian can't really help but be specific when you're at the mercy of a black and white digital world where metadata is king and unforgiving. It's like examining the rings of the tree without seeing the tree itself. And this method of assembling all these secondary sources into a narrative, this brief narrative, means the historian is now able to see the forest through the trees. The reader can come across a wide variety of subjects in the text. You get the everyday goings on, you get the ongoing political drama of whether or not Waratah should join Greater Newcastle and pay taxes, the personal stories, births, deaths, marriages, triumphs, tragedies. I ran into a lady about 4 or 5 times in this entire text where she had like, Mrs. Smith isn't doing well, Mrs. Smith has breast cancer, Mrs. Smith has had her breast cancer tumor excised, and Mrs. Smith a few years later is doing quite well. And that's a really fantastic arc for me, because I'm glad she's doing well. She died 150 odd years ago, but she's doing well, and I'm glad. So it gives you this really interesting context that you're not going to get if you read as a really specific source. And it allows you to meander through this and figure out things you wouldn't often get. So the idea is that it's a very modern problem. You're drowning in all this data. You have an unlimited amount of stuff to go through on Trove, but how do you find information from this data? How do you get something meaningful out of it? And this is a really interesting way of doing it. And this lady did it 40 years ahead of her time on a typewriter in the 80s. A compilation of articles like this is sort of like going through an archive in miniature. It's the archival experiences where you go through and you find digressions and winding side paths and distractions, and you meander through this garden. And time again, I've seen researchers get enamored with some piece of information they didn't even know existed or they never anticipated to find. And this can light a fire under them. And sometimes they change their entire course in pursuit of this sudden bit of information that's been popped in front of them. And it's fantastic. And this method of assembling information really replicates that like garden path nature of the archive. It's really rich, it's really fascinating, it's diverse, and you just never know what you're going to get. So it's just a fantastic representation of what we could do now and assemble this via script, via Python script, via web scrapers, and it is just such a fantastic way of doing it. And I really hope somebody can do something like this in the future to explore this method of pulling together these narratives from newspapers. Thank you.
Thank you, Zane. Does anyone have any questions?
I was just wondering how the university came to hold this archive.
So as far as I'm aware, I was actually the one who accessioned this and put it into the collection proper from a raw box. And that's sort of how I found it. The information of how we came about it is actually with the physical files. And with lockdown, I'm not able to actually go in and check where exactly it came from. But I imagine it was mostly a donation of family history material, and we generally don't accept that. So it must have slipped through at some point in the distant past and gotten through it. I really must contact Margaret's descendants. I think she died in 2002. So I'd really love to contact them and say that their mother's or their grandmother's work has been really, really interesting to me. But essentially, yes, it was just a local donation of the thing. You can read the entire text online. Anne can post a link there and you can read the whole thing in an afternoon. It's really fantastic.
And so I missed the start. So she would have accessed the newspapers just from the library or something, did she?
Yes. So before the age of Trove and digital searching, all the newspapers are on microfiche, and some newspapers like the Newcastle Herald are still on microfiche. So she would go to a local library, pull out the Newcastle Chronicle, read through 10 years worth of newspapers and copy down everyone with a reference to the village of Waratah.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Zane. Very interesting.
And I guess the other beauty, Zane, is because it's typed, it can be OCR'd and searchable, and people can look for surnames and street names and things like that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. If you download it from our website, you can actually just download an entire copy for yourself, and you can just press Control F and find whatever you like. And
so I've got the correct link in the chat. And like I said, there's also the, we've got the contact and links on our Hunter Living History site as well. Michelle Watson's made the comment. She did the same thing with her honours thesis about new bolds in Waratah, and 2 months in front of a microfilm machine, every article about new bolds from the Newcastle Morning Herald. So yeah, it's a big job. Trove is fantastic, but yeah, you just think before that sort of online access and access from home, people were very creative. So thank you, Zane. So our next panelist is Johnny DeGravio, OAM. Johnny's the University Archivist at the University Library and also chairs the Hunter Living Histories group, and he's professional representative and co-chair on Glam Peak Australia. Over the past 20 years, he's used emerging and evolving technologies to connect people with historic records and archives across time and space. He is very committed to forging links across thousands of years of Aboriginal Australian culture and human expression in all its forms and formats, with the aim to creating a new meta science, merging Renaissance, Western science and the Aboriginal wisdom and connection to land for a better future. So welcome, Johnny.
Hello, everyone. Welcome and thanks for making the time with us today to have a bit of a jaunt through our favourite things while we're all in lockdown. My favourite thing was the stone book. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
And if I click this view the 3D model, does the box come up for you?
It does, yeah.
It does. So you can see the 3D?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's my favourite thing, I guess. So that's what I've been thinking about as part of today's presentation. Now, this was a 3D scan that we did thanks to our GlamX lab in the library, and gave us the ability to be able to turn our objects into three-dimensional representations and put it in our living histories data platform. So that's where some really cool things can be found if you've got things you want to do. Now, I just want to see if I can click out of that. All right, that's the stone book. This is our living histories platform, which is where it sits. For the story of where it came from, this was the original blog post. It was donated a few years ago. We don't know who created it, but this fella here, Robert Stevens, former member of the library, he was Robert was the classic thing of don't judge a book by the cover, because he was a biker, he had tattoos, he looked pretty dangerous, but he loved antiques and wonderful things. He came up to me one day and he said, I've got this thing that's been passed down through the family and I want to donate it to you in cultural collections. And now special collections. So it was this stone book. He didn't know anything about it. He said it had been passed down through the family, and we accepted the donation because it's just such an odd thing. And I put a blog post together on our special collections blog here. This is the blog. And at the time we were doing monthly broadcasts with Carol Duncan on 1233 local radio station. And I put the stone book up and asking people whether they'd seen anything like this before, because it was an undocumented folk tradition, I guess is what you would say. So I love these mysteries, and I love sharing these mysteries with the community, because you never know what can come back. Anyway, what came back was a whole series of international people getting in touch with us, like Carol Kenner from Washington, DC, and she found our stone book blog post and she wrote about her family's blog posts. And these are the little stories they say. I own a little book carved of pale marble with a wreath around my great-grandmother's name on one side and the date 1861 on the other. A row of hearts runs down the spine. The carvings and the pages were gilded but have gone a greenish black with time. And then she starts to say that it was a gift. Her great-grandfather defended a man accused of murder and protected him from the death penalty. Although the man received a life sentence, he was so happy to be alive that he carved a little set of these little stone books for his lawyer's 4 daughters as a thank you gift. So he was, and she was the great-granddaughter of the eldest daughter, and she still has it. And these were the images, and her name was Fanny Eads. Then Ian Evans, who was one of our postgraduates, he was studying a really interesting topic on found objects that you locate in buildings. And these objects were like ritual objects that were placed by the builders to protect the building. Anyway, look up Ian Evans's thesis. It's in Nova. And it's a fascinating read. If ever you come across builders that are demolishing places, they find all sorts of strange things, like mummified cats and shoes, predominantly. These all odd objects that are left in the corners of the cardinal points of buildings. So did an interesting study, but one of the things they found was a stone book. So he sent me a picture of his stone book, and there it is there. The biggest one that we found was Alan Garner, who wrote this book. Can you see that at all?
Yes, we can.
You can? Oh, good,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Well, Alan Garner was an author that wrote a book called The Stone Book Quartet. And he actually sent us the stone book that was the inspiration for it. So I thought, oh my God, this is quite exciting. And he had a friend of his, and they were very interested in English stone books, obviously, but very interested in why stone books were starting to appear in Australia. And then one of the local fellas down here in Mayfield, this was another fella, Jim Downey, I asked him about it. Once I started seeing that there was a connection between stone cutters and stonemasons, I knew that his grandfather was William Ferrier, who built the Sydney train station, Central Station in Sydney. And Jim had to think about it. He said, yes, I do. And then he sent me pictures of his. So that was his marble stone book. So I just started amassing this collection. And then we started getting researchers from America contacting us. Of note, Ian Burke, who's a a real estate agent in San Francisco who's got this love and collection of these things, and he thought they were just an American phenomenon. And if you want to check out Ian's site, I might have to find a way. Here we go. This is his site here, American Stone Books, and he's got over 200, maybe 300 of these things. But he was very intrigued by the blog, and we just helped networking because he wanted to meet Caroline. And so we contacted Caroline and put all these other people in touch with one another. Now, in the end of this, what did we think about these things? Well, they're one of two things. Either they were a special type of representation of the Bible that people who couldn't read could take to church. They might have been blessed by a priest. That's that sort of thing. Or maybe they were a memorial to the dead. The reason being that the book was closed. So when your book's open, it's like your life is still being written, but symbolically when your book is shut, then your life's come to an end, and that's the end of your life. So it remains a mystery, but it sits out there to continue making connections with people. And yeah, please enjoy.
Thanks, Gioni. Certainly an unusual collection, isn't it? And being able to 3D scan is, again, perfect to share. Does anyone have any questions at all?
I was just wondering if any of the others that other people had come across, whereas kind of the Newcastle one seems to have no inscriptions or carvings or anything, so it's very cool.
There was a real variety in the workmanship. Some were beautiful and ornate, some had people's names on them. Ian told me that when he found Carolyn's one, he said these are extremely rare to actually have a name or a date on them. Roberts was sort of made out of sandstone, probably late 19th, early 20th century, even though Caroline kept referring to them as ancient. I don't know whether it was because it was Australian and she just saw it was probably thousands of years old, but he believed it, he dated it. And it was, of course, manufactured, but some are quite beautiful, made out of marble. So it was a real, but it had something to do, I mean, with this idea that before we became a literate culture, the education of people came through symbolism, and stonecutters who were creating those beautiful ornate statues and reliefs on churches educated you through symbol and through object, right? So when we became literate and started to read, then these arts of trying to communicate through stone, or the Bible in stone as they used to refer to it, started to die out. So it's like a lost art. But these things were passed down through generations and no one knew why. One family rang me up once and said all they were told about it was some kind of a test. So I don't know if it was part of some kind of secret ritual that these stonemasons went through as part of Masonic ritual. Hopefully we might learn something through this, through the fraternal societies. But look, it's one of those open questions which have a look in, you know, and see what you can make of it. That's my dog barking in the background. So
Lunchtime.
Yes.
Any other questions at all? We've got a few minutes left, so if there's any other questions relating to any of the topics or collections that have been spoken about today, yeah, please feel free to ask. Okay, we're actually ahead of time, which is quite good. So look, if there's no other questions, I might just get you to just share in thanking the panelists today. Thank you for participating, and I hope that you found the session of some interest, and please browse our University of Library special collection links. And we also hold our Hunter Living History meetings once a month. They're all on Zoom. So if you're a researcher and have an interest in the regions of our university campuses at the University of Newcastle, you're very welcome to come along and share and also be part of a community network. We find it's a really valuable resource where people can share their knowledge and also ask questions. So look, thank you very much. Everyone keep safe and well, and have a lovely weekend. And yeah, thanks again for joining us.